Gurudev Gaura Chandra Radhika Dale Krishna Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dandavat Pranam devotees, and for those who, still, Madhavatiti Kadasi Ki Jai. Obviously tomorrow is Mahadvarasi, and also the appearance of Shiva Rahadev, and then of course, Wednesday is the Nityananda Trayodasi. So I very much look forward to absorption in those days and the Harikatha for those tithis. But today, Dandavat Sadhana Siriprabhu, Dandavat Lilanath Prabhu. So, but today, because I felt I would not have sufficient time to go into this later in the week because of the tithis that are coming up, that I would do a famous last word short video synopsis, basically of the second part of what later on I decided to do was to make a really full presentation out of these things somewhere in the near future. But just now to kind of give overviews more or less. So this is a part 2 of the dismantling of atheism. I've already done a video previously entitled such. And then I followed up by giving also a answer to some questions that came in regarding that original presentation. So today, I'm just again giving a kind of overview in this part 2, excuse me, beginning a little bit with a review of what we discussed previously, and then moving on to some interesting parallels in the origins both of the cosmos and origins of life narratives, narratives. And lastly, to deal with the great missing element of consciousness. That is the true missing link, as I described it in the thumbnail. So let me just get to one thing that I wanted to do. Just wanted to have the notes available. Here we go. Okay. So in the original video, and this is just kind of a synopsis or summary of what went on there, we wanted to establish a couple of things. One, that unless we're working with common definitions, it's very difficult to really ascertain whether or not people are discussing the same thing. If you don't define what it is that's going to be the base definitions of the subjects that are brought up, in this case God, existence of God or not, intelligence, because intelligence is a big part of what we consider when we describe that even in the manifest creation, the symptom of intelligence is a symptom of God, and the definition of nature itself. What do we mean when we say nature? And as well, the nature of phenomenon, because sometimes things that can't be experienced because it's someone's subjective stance or someone's subjective experience is a better word, then it can be experienced objectively when it becomes a phenomenon, right? Just to give an example of that, if you had, quote, this is just something to give an idea, if you had someone have a particular kind of delusion, let's say, and suddenly you saw that millions of people had that delusion, it would no longer be a subjective experience of that person, but it would be an objective phenomenon which you consider to need to be dealt with. Why is everybody having this experience? You understand? So we're going to get to the point about that in the summary. The other thing that we kind of went over was the whole idea of burden of proof. Normally in any discussion about the existence of God, there is pretty much on the part of atheists a very, I think, tactical idea that they have. If we shift the burden of proof to the theist, then it will help us to simply point out the faults in the theistic presentation. However, if someone knows something, and you do not know that thing, you understand? You cannot ask that person to prove to you what it is they know. You can inquire why it is I don't know. You understand? So there's a difference. There's a difference in saying there's a burden of proof on someone to prove something, right, that they have an experience of, right, but you don't. There's a difference between that ideal and the idea of saying, I don't know. And you're saying you do know, can you explain it to me? You understand? There's a huge difference. Because giving an explanation or giving information to someone who's ignorant on a particular thing is not proving something, it's enlightening someone in something they don't know. So basically, atheists are in a position where they cannot disprove the existence of God. So what they will do is then say, well, you cannot prove a negative, right? And they consider this to be a very tactical statement. Well, now I've got them because I'm saying you can't prove a negative, right? And so the meaning of that, which if you don't know, means that you cannot prove or disprove something that doesn't exist. That's the gist of what that saying is. You can't prove a negative. In other words, you cannot prove something that doesn't exist or disprove it, right? So here's the catch to all of that. If you're arguing that the reason the burden of proof is not on you to disprove the existence of God, right? And you say that's because you can't prove a negative, then it comes to the reality, what are we discussing? Because if there is no existence of God, why are you even debating it? If something doesn't exist, why would you be debating it? And if you claim, as one atheist does very openly, Richard Dawkins, that God is a delusion, well, would you not be more delusional to engage in a debate about something that doesn't exist? Would you not be more delusional? If you're debating something that doesn't exist, are you delusional or not? Therefore, you almost axiomatically admit to the existence of God by suggesting you can debate or prove or disprove that existence. You understand? You're acknowledging that there's something to discuss in the matter of proof or disproof. So you're acknowledging the existence of that thing. So this is just how ridiculous atheistic arguments are. Secondly, you could challenge, if you say that there is no existence of God and you can't disprove a negative, then let's bring up another example. Please give me any example of something that doesn't exist that you can verbalize. So, of course, you have to take a pregnant pause there. Just describe anything that does not exist that you can verbalize, which means it would come into your intellectual mental faculties, and then you could verbalize something that doesn't exist. And then you give them a minute. And, of course, their first reply will be, well, dancing pink elephants don't exist. Unicorns don't exist. Fairies don't exist. So now you have to go back and you have to say, listen, first of all, the color pink does exist. Elephants do exist and flight exists. That someone puts those things together in a combination which is not in our common experience doesn't mean they don't exist. In other words, flight exists. Pink, the color, exists, and elephants exist. So all you've done is try to put a combination together which is not in our normative experience. But on the other hand, is our experience broad enough to cover all time, all space, all existence? No. So you can't even affirm that that doesn't exist. You understand? It doesn't exist in our experience. But you still have not come up with a thing. Among the three things you tried to put together in a combination we have an experience, right? You still haven't, by the way, I may bring you a couple of hippies from 1960s who'll tell you pink elephants do exist, right? Anyway, aside from the jokes, The point being, you haven't really named something that doesn't exist. Fairies, right? Actually, fairies is something that was taken from early Europe based on the idea of Gandharvas and so forth that they read about in other cultures, of celestial beings who come in, who sing and who dance, etc., right? What about unicorns? The word unicorn actually means unihorn. That's what unicorn means. Unihorn. It meant animals that had one horn. And in India especially, there is a particular form of a deer, right, which has one horn, which looks very much like what became the fantasy version of a unicorn. You understand? So you have not declared or described something that doesn't exist. You've simply tried to dismiss the issue by demeaning association. In other words, by associating with things that people normally think are fantasy, you understand? Because people also are not going to research to determine what kind of fantasy that is, but simply trying to associate the absolute truth or associate God with things that are considered to be fantasy. You try to escape the reality that you cannot name something that doesn't exist. The reason is because the human faculty is part of a creation. It's not a creator. You understand? We don't create anything. We take inspiration and shape things which have been created. I had 2 careers in my life, one obviously in law enforcement and one in music, right? And in music, even the most inspired soloist is simply taking notes that exist already in a scale and by inspiration manipulating those notes. So they're not truly creating the sound, the notes, or anything else. They're simply manipulating them by inspiration. We are co-inspirers in observing and manifesting a creation that already exists. And you can't create one single thing outside of that. So you challenge any atheist, name me something that does not exist. Name it. Because, see, there's no place in the human faculty, intellectually or mentally, to grasp at something that's not there. So to say God is in that category, then what are you talking about? What is God? Well, and then you get the whole idea of what they believe God is. So right now, you're very much a theist. You've just identified your deity because you're talking about a belief. You simply identified your deity as science or whatever atheistic anchor you're holding on to, nature, whatever atheistic anchor you're holding on to, you simply acquired belief in that particular thing to the denial of the conceptions given by many traditions and many practitioners of a divine deity. That's all. That's all you've done. You've not proven the non-existence of God. So I think that's enough, and I think it suffices there to say that that's a very false argument, a very weak argument, that you cannot disprove a negative, right? Also, it's further solidification of the idea that a burden of proof would not be on the theist, on the person who believes in God, because they're having that experience. It's a knowledge to them. It's a revelation to them. They're not in a position where they need to prove that. You understand? You're in a position of ignorance as an atheist because you truly can't say you know or don't know. So in that position of ignorance, all you can do is inquire to get enlightened about why this person does have that realization. And you may even want to access how I can get it. Right? All right, so then we went on to discuss different tactics that are used in debate. And I named one of them just a minute ago, where I mentioned how atheists may try to demean a particular statement by associating it with things that are, quote, trivial. You understand? In other words, they'll try to associate the idea of God with other things that are considered fantasy in our social fabric, right? So another thing they will do is they will try to bolster their position according to their material credentials. In other words, the social fabric is set up in such a way, or the social construct is such, that we identify people who have, quote, gone and got an education, right? And they've been given certain designations based on that, which means you really accepted indoctrination, is basically what it means. Right? I went to college. So what it basically means You did whatever you had to do to pass those courses, and when you get out, they recognize that by giving you a piece of paper or sheepskin or whatever it might be that says, we acknowledge that you passed our indoctrinational program up to this point. Whether it is BS, BA, AA, right, or PhD, whatever it might be, they're acknowledging you've accepted the indoctrination up to that point. Does that necessarily mean you've gained wisdom? Does that necessarily mean you truly have become enlightened and your intelligence is illumined? It doesn't. It means you become indoctrinated or you become acquainted with a particular field of activity. I know how to work on a computer. I know how to engineer a structure. I know how to design a structure from an architect. I know how to calculate different mathematical equations and so forth and use that to manifest other material things if I'm in any of the sciences. Physics or chemistry, biology, if I'm going to make medicines and work for Big Pharma, whatever it might be, you simply have been trained in that particular field and recognized. And in the social construct, they're calling that intelligence, right? Advanced intelligence, and giving a certain social status to it. So many times in any kind of discussion, people want to put that in the front as a shield. I am a physicist, I am a biologist or a chemist, whatever it might be, and therefore that should carry a certain amount of weight in a discussion which may not exclusively have anything to do with chemistry or biology. You understand? So though that might come up in an overall discussion, they try to center their field of expertise as the reason why whatever they say, even outside that field, should be taken as gospel. Another thing they do is try to delude people. Delude means to create an atmosphere where people are so confused you cannot really focus into the topic, and hence whether or not logical arguments are being presented. Because in a state of delusion, people don't function with logic. So the way they do that is they will speak in the particular jargon of that field, whether it's chemistry or biology, and obviously speak over the heads of people who are not acquainted with the parlance that's used in chemistry, biology, or physics, or whatever it might be, the particular field. It would be equivalent to me giving a whole lecture on Vaishnava theology to a group of new people and simply speak most of it in Sanskrit language and speak most of it in the deepest theological areas of our practice, etc. That's what it would be like. So by doing that, they create an atmosphere that I've just spoken so many things that it will delude from even common sense logic. Because whatever I've said, you don't understand it, but it must mean whatever else I say must be a fact. You understand? And then the fourth thing is dismissal. So dismissal, you'll hear in almost any, if you pull up any debate on YouTube between theists and atheists, you will inevitably hear the atheist say, oh, that's just nonsense. Oh, that's ridiculous. There's no real basis to them saying it, but it's just based on, again, how they've postured themselves with the hearers of that particular debate, that I'm an authority. And if I say this is just ridiculous, it should be accepted as face value, regardless of logic, etc. That, oh, that's ridiculous. That's nonsense. You understand? So these are kind of four methods: deluding people, dismissing people, bolstering oneself by things that really don't have anything to do with the overall particular thing that's being debated, right? So these are different tactics that are used in the atheistic-theist debates, right, which we should expect anytime we have discussions like this with people who are atheists. Then we went on to give the different definitions, and the reason we set up these definitions is so that the goalpost can't be moved. In other words, sometime when you're having a discussion, what they will do is suddenly shift the definition from one thing to another. So one of the things we need to do is pinpoint people when they want to have these discussions. Here's what we mutually agree is the definition of this word. So anything going forward that discusses proof or disproof about our subject matter will be based on this definition. We should have confidence that whatever definition comes up, unless it is completely ridiculous, can be accommodated in expressing the existence and the absolute nature of God, because God is absolute. Right? So we did go over a couple of definitions at that time. Let me open them up and just go. I'll be quick because I want to get to the other subject matter here. So we went over God first of all, and I'll just narrow this down. One of the features of God was that it's accepted as a supreme being and a power, right? The original German word was Godon. Godon means invocation of power, right? So they acknowledge at least those two things. Something supreme to ourselves and also something that has power, right? And obviously that power would be in a superlative position to our own, right? So if nothing else, you can describe God as a supreme being and a supreme power, right? Then we went on to examples of intelligence. And then under intelligence in the dictionary, I just took basic dictionary definitions. It means having or showing intelligence, especially of a high degree. So now that will come into play, because if we describe God as the intelligent designer of this entire cosmos, then this argument of what intelligence means, having or showing in a very high degree, right, could be applicable to God, right? Why? Because looking at the manifestation of the material world, certainly we see intelligent design in it, right? We certainly see, and I'm going to get to a little bit more when I do a comparison of the Vedic model or narrative of creation, etc., and the scientific model, right? And I'm not giving details on them, I'm just giving kind of an overview for comparison. So, but we can see certainly there's intelligent design in the universe, right? Now, the definition of intelligence was having or possessing. Having or possessing both are indicative of persona, because someone has. You understand? Someone shows. So having and showing are personal features. They're not impersonal features. Then nature. Nature is the phenomenon of the physical world collectively, including everything in it, right? And that's kind of what the dictionary describes as nature, right? So we'll take that definition, that's fine, right? And then phenomenon. Phenomenon is a fact, phenomenon, a fact or situation that is observed to exist or happen, especially one whose cause or explanation is in question, right? So that's what we have here. We have a phenomenon, right? We're questioning a particular thing, but we acknowledge, first of all, see, this is another thing. By saying it's a phenomenon, it means it was observed. So observing a phenomenon is also an objective experience that to some degree proves already its existence. If you're discussing it, whether it's in question or not, the thing, you're discussing it, it is indicative of its existence. It's existing at least as a phenomenon at this point. Right? All right, so let's move on. So now, of course, there's two kind of narratives about the origin of both the cosmos and the origins of existence, human existence, right? Or existence, period. One is that the scientists essentially say that an abiogenesis, which is now going out of favor, which abiogenesis means there was no actual biological phenomenon, that even that biological phenomenon came by the result of a mixture of things happening and then some stimulus that then generated the idea of biological phenomenon, which then turns into obviously the genesis of early life cells. They build on themselves. Eventually they build themselves up. Then we start the whole evolutionary cycle as described by Darwin up to our present day, right? As far as the beginning of the cosmos is concerned, there's a general idea that one French priest came up with. His name was George Lamartine, right? That's how I've heard it pronounced. I could very well be pronouncing it wrong. I discussed it with my wife earlier this morning. So, but the point was, he had the idea, right, that observing, because he was a scientist as well, I think he was a physicist, his observation of the cosmos gave him the impression of the universe moving towards us in a way that indicated that there was a huge explosion of some sort, and that the result was this huge mass of material that happened in the Big Bang, which then created the whole idea of the rest of his theory, right? So I'm not doing justice to either one of those things, truly, but they're certainly available for research. But I will give a synopsis in more clarity of the Vedic cosmology. And the Vedic cosmology says, first and foremost, that there certainly is intelligent design, right? So I described what intelligence is earlier, to have or possess intelligence at a very high level. If anyone will look at the working of the cosmos, the tightness of the tolerances, even in the function of gravity, in the way the solar system works, if there is any offset in one way or another, it would destroy the entire universal structure. You understand? Just a little, based on the calculations, a little bit going off one way or another could have devastating effects, right? Similarly, even within our own biology, within our own bodies and the way they work, if there's a little bit of issue with the biology, we see that it has the effects of disease, crippling, so many different things. So, to have designed things in such a way that they work within these very tight tolerances would have certainly required intelligence. So science says you have to empirically prove that. Well, in common sense, empirical experience every day, do we see anything that functions at a high level of organization, order, with such specificity and within degrees, especially of high tolerance, that doesn't have intelligent design behind it? And if so, name the thing. What is it that works in such precise order, under very systematic arrangements, with very tight tolerances to make that function consistent, that doesn't have intelligent design behind it? Means it wasn't designed by a human person with intelligence. We don't see that. So even if the scientists want to say we need empirical evidence, that's the empirical evidence. That you cannot find that kind of intelligent function of order, systemization, operating in very tight tolerances without somebody having designed it. If so, show me something that does that. Sometimes what happens is the over application of intelligent outreach, which means extending our own intellectual faculty to try to grasp the nature of everything, puts people in an inflated position, right? And that's exactly what happens pretty much in atheism. People end up in an inflated position in which they believe that somehow or another their intelligence will seek out something that doesn't appear in common sense. Common sense means what's the common sensibility of billions of people, maybe a little over 8 billion at this point we believe is on the planet. 8 billion people, if you ask them that question, listen, sir, I just passed this particular building that you work in. So, of course, the building came from nothing, right? It was, the materials were there and they just erected it. You'd pretty soon be guided to the local mental facility. So how is it possible to have a discussion with somebody who's very credentialed, right, according to the social construct, and that kind of common sense is unavailable? Unless there's a purposeful intent on denying that intelligent design. Understand? Now, that also makes sense. If you yourself want to be God, you'd have to remove that idea of a God, and one way to do that is to remove the causation of the intelligence that you yourself have, because you're part of the creation. So the idea is, I've become so intelligent as just part of the creation, I could figure out the origination of creation has no intelligence. Again, what kind of logic is that? I myself now can figure out by my intelligence that the origin of everything that's in our experience had no intelligence. All right, enough said. So, in the Vedic model, the idea of intelligent design is the first thing, right? Because we accept, right, and I'm trying to stay away from just implanting theology here. I'm just planting logical common sense, right? So that there is a divine, or at least divine intellectual design as the original causation of what we're experiencing. Because we don't see in the effect, which is the creation itself, right, things that couldn't be there in the cause. So if you find intelligence in the effect, it's indicative it must have been there in the cause. And therefore the idea that all life started from a sort of chemical composition that then generated self sufficiently into organisms which form the structures of human life, which then grew into this intelligence. That's ridiculous. Because if there was no intelligence in the original primordial soup, which then started organizing itself into cells and then into the building, even before that, it would have to organize the atoms into cells, you understand, and those cells into the biological structures, right, with the particular coding, because in DNA, on the spine of DNA, there's coding. That coding is the basis under which the DNA knows how to function to reconstruct amino acids in the proteins, etc., and which become the building blocks of our existence. You understand? So you're telling me that the primordial soup was an unintelligent mass of stuff that did that? But me suggesting to you that there's an original intelligent existence beyond our purview which did it is more fanciful than you telling me a primordial soup did it? Now, next thing is that not only is that intelligent design principle there, but when you look at what's described in our Srimad Bhagavatam, in many cases it aligns with a lot of things that have been observed even by the scientific community. For instance, only very recently, and it's being challenged still, it's not official, they're having the idea of the multiverse. Multiverse means that they believe there's more than one universe. Certainly in Srimad Bhagavatam it describes from the exhalation of Mahavishnu, unlimited universes come. Not only that, but if you would just imagine, and we don't tend to think about it in these terms, but in the exhalation of Mahavishnu, how powerful that must be, and also the unfolding of the Mahatattva, right? Because in the beginning of any creation cycle, all of the material elements and ingredients are in an undifferentiated state in what's called Pradhan, or the Mahatattva, right? So imagine the exhaling of Mahavishnu and the expanding of that Mahatattva. Would that not seem like a Big Bang? So if you want to equate Big Bang with that phenomenon, it's documented even in writing 5,000 years ago. You understand? Because if you imagine exhalation, and even Lamatri's idea that it seemed like the universal structure was moving towards us, so by perception, if I'm standing in front of you, right, and you breathe out, right, then the air coming from your body, it certainly will have an effect on me. Now, hopefully nobody will stand in front of the other and take a deep breath and on somebody, right? We don't ascribe to such things. But practically speaking, if two people are standing in front of each other, right, because in many cases how germs are transmitted, right? You will breathe, and from your body, the air will carry out that thrust and it enters into another person, right? So if you took the Srimad Bhagavatam's description of Mahavishnu's exhalation and the unfolding of the Mahatattva, very well it could be explained as a Big Bang, if that's your fancy. You understand? Secondly, in relation to the origin of life, Srimad Bhagavatam describes that all of the various species of life are already manifest in existence. And there are 8,400,000 different species of life. Well, the National Geographic's biodiversity section describes that they consider there are 8,700,000 species of life. That's a pretty close number. That's a pretty close number. See, really what's happening is that people are discovering things that already exist. And in the process of that discovery, they're finding out more and more as you go further and further in discovery. You'll have to come to the plateau where my ability to discover is checked. So then some more advances take place. It extends the empiric ability to discover more. And you keep going on for that, right? Now, most people live at best for 100 years. So that means in these 100-year cycles of invention, discovery, how long will that take in a universe they describe as being 13.8 billion years old? You understand? How long will it take for you to come to the absolute conclusion? You could pretty much say never. You understand? That's not to mention that time is completely different experience in different places. For instance, obviously in Vedic cosmology, time works in a cyclic way. In the atheistic scientific worldview, time is a linear phenomenon that we're looking at. And just think about why, even though archaeologists, paleontologists, and many others who studied, anthropologists who studied ancient cultures, certainly knew that in these cultures, like in ancient Vedic culture, Kemetic culture, Egyptian culture, ancient Aztec or Mayan culture, China, if you go to any ancient culture, they always looked at time in a cyclic fashion. The time worked in several series of cycles. Just like in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto, chapter 5 to 12, it discusses everything from time from the atom up to how to understand the creation. You understand? So, also, when you look at it and you start calculating time according to Vedic cosmology, then obviously the cosmos, according to those calculations, and what are those kind of calculations? Well, if you look at one cycle would be 432,000 years times 4 would be the Satya Yuga. 432,000 years times 3 would be the Treta Yuga, right? 432,000 years times 2, Dwapara Yuga. 432,000 times itself would be Kali Yuga. If you take that total number, right, that is comprised of one cycle of the yugas, right? It's called the Dipya Yuga, one cycle. When that cycle goes around 71 times, it constitutes one Manavatar. 14 of those Manavatars constitute one day of Lord Brahma, who, by the way, since nobody else witnessed the beginning of creation, at least in Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a witness, right, to the secondary feature of the creation, who saw how things were put together. We can at least claim a witness. Now, obviously, I'm speaking theologically here, and if you're having a debate, obviously that's all going to be dismissed. You understand? But we, as practicing Vaishnavas, we have at least a basis to say there was an empirical observation because somebody was there. Where science is trying to tell us that even though no one, right, in the whole scientific explanations, they never account for someone having witnessed it, they're conjecturing on it based from billions of years later, and we should accept that over an account of somebody who did witness it. There's just many illogical things. But anyway, back to time. So that constitutes one day of Brahma. His night is also composed of the same period of time. At the end of the day of Brahma, there's a partial dissolution. All scientists agree there has been partial dissolutions on the planet even. You understand? They acknowledge that. So where's the incongruity between that and what's being described in Srimad Bhagavatam, except perhaps time, because time is viewed differently. You understand? The relation of the amount of species is pretty close. Now, coming closer to a linchpin point that I want to make, is that according to Srimad Bhagavatam, all of the different species are manifest by a secondary creation. The 8,400,000 species of life, aquatic, reptile, humans, right? 400,000 different categories of human, birds, trees, etc., plant life, all laid out. I'm not quoting that verse. I don't even remember that verse by heart, actually, right? So now, here's where the issue comes in. The biggest difference between what science is advocating and what we say obviously cannot be true is that if you have the existence of all of these forms of life, the big question is, where is the life, what is the life, and where did it come from? That question has to be answered. So scientists are saying it is an evolution of chemical and biological processes that have created this life as we know it, including all the different species. And that those species evolve one to another based on the ability to adapt, right? Because adaptation is a big part of the neo-Darwin evolutionary theory, this whole idea of adaptation and so forth and so on, where essentially species are adapting to their environment and undergoing changes. You understand? So while you would then have humans at the top of the food chain right now, where humans can't survive in many of the conditions that formerly animals, and even today animals survive in. So there's just so much illogical ideas that are presented here. But the point being, that's what they're saying, how life is generated. But then the question would be, is that life? That's the question. Is life the chemical biological process? So when you analyze that statement, they're saying affirmatively, life is the biological chemical process, right? Then you should be able to take that process at this stage of the game and make life. It's that simple. Now that burden of proof for that is on the atheist. Right now you're declaring absolutely by your empiric observations, your predictions, your experimentation, your replications, right? You say that it's been challenged, but obviously it's challenged in terms of your theory. When they say something is, because part of the scientific method is it has to be challengeable. People have to be able to come in and challenge the theory. But if you simply bring in people who are in the same field of ignorance regarding certain aspects of the human condition, and they're just going to debate whether or not your theory is plausible, right? That's a different thing than coming in and establishing the implausibility of the theory based on a whole different dynamic, which is what we're doing. We're saying it is not possible to have life without consciousness. I'm not even getting into the soul yet. I'm talking about consciousness. Consciousness is the symptom of life. When a body is dead, even if the entire chemical arrangement is there, that chemical arrangement is not functioning, the neurological functions of the brain are not happening because there's an absence of an ingredient that you're not accounting for, which is consciousness. Now, obviously, there's a whole realm now that's trying to deal with consciousness, but still in the so-called hard scientific establishment, consciousness is not really a consideration, or it's a peripheral one at best. And those who are dealing with it on the periphery, right, really still are grasping at straws, basically, because until you then acknowledge a seeding of that consciousness, you can't explain what it is. It is not a neurological function of the brain, right? That consciousness is not a neurological function of the brain. The brain's neurological functions are reactive, they're not causative. You understand? They cause reactions in the physical body, but they're not the genesis of thinking, feeling, and willing. And consciousness is a symptom of existence of something which has the capacity to do thinking, feeling, and willing. Consciousness itself is not thinking, feeling, and willing. It is a symptom of something that it's associated with that does thinking, feeling, and willing. You understand? For instance, if someone is unconscious, we actually use the phrase, the person is alive, all the chemicals are there, everything is there, but they are unconscious. Why would we use that word? It means we're recognizing the absence of something. They're unconscious. Their unconsciousness, their consciousness is not manifesting itself, but the chemical reactions, right, they're going on, but the consciousness is somehow or another not responding, even though the body and its chemical biological functions are there. So it means consciousness has an independent posture from the body. What's more proof of that? When you lay your body down at night, you understand? When you lay your body down at night, then you have so many other experiences. And that's obviously in a body in which the consciousness is taking the subtle body, which scientists are going to say this is all going on in the human brain, right? But again, the brain is a reactionary phenomenon. It's not a causative phenomenon. Other than that, everybody's brain should be dictating the same thing because we all have the same brain. It may be different sizes, there may be certain medical anomalies in the brain or whatever, but basically the composition of a brain is the same. But the individuality we're experiencing is obviously something different. Understand? So I'm going to end here. That was the point I wanted to get to, was up to the point of consciousness. Because without recognition of consciousness, you'll never get to the platform of the soul, what to speak of getting to the platform of God. You understand? So I will do a follow-up to this, but again, I just want to again point out certain things regarding the dismantling of atheism. All right, my Dandavat Pranam devotees. Vanchakaupatarubhyascha Kripasinduvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Dhanavad Pranam. Radhe Radhe.